Welcome everybody to the Shebeen. I'm Barry Chandler coming to you from Cork, and it's Sunday night. A little bit of a different look this evening. Camera is giving me all kinds of problems, so technical difficulties have relegated us to our tertiary camera here. Not even our secondary camera could be gotten to work tonight. So you're welcome. It's going to be a good night ahead. We're going to dive into the rise of craft distilling in Ireland. Despite not being able to see me as well as you normally do, normally we have a much better camera. The show must go on. Whiskey must be enjoyed and talked about, and we must all get together on a Sunday night. So let us know what's in your glass. Let us know what you're drinking. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. And we're going to dive into those who are embarking on craft distilling journeys across Ireland, be it with whiskey, poitin, gin, absinthe, and more tonight. So get yourself a drop of Irish whiskey, find yourself a comfortable seat, and settle in to the Shebeen. How are you all getting on? The time between our Shebeens seems to fly. Before I know it, it's always a Thursday, and I'm wondering, have I got everything in order or ready for the next Shebeen? And these things tend to sneak up on us. Tonight, we're going to dive into craft distilling, but I'm also going to take some questions from you all that you posed during the week in our Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group to talk about. If you've got any questions during the night about Irish whiskey, about poitin, about any of the distilleries and the distillers we talk about this evening, please feel free to put them into the chat and we'll get through as many questions as we possibly can. If you've just joined us and you're wondering why am I not in the usual three-dimensional picture quality, camera trouble, all kinds of camera problems tonight. Could not get the camera to connect as it normally does, but hopefully I'm still coming through and you can see me, but you're not here to see me. You're here to listen to listen to talk about Irish whiskey and chat with each other, which we'll still be able to do. So I'm going to keep myself as small as possible on the screen throughout the night so that we focus on the whiskeys and the spirits. I'm curious as the night goes on to get your thoughts and input as well. The Shebeen is not just me talking to you, it's you talking to me and each other. And I'd love to get your thoughts on craft distilling and craft brewing and brands and distilleries and whiskies that you think of when you think of craft distilling. We'll spend a good bit of time talking about that this evening. We'll also dive into new Irish whiskies launched in the past few weeks. We'll talk about things that are happening with the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club. And we will, as I mentioned earlier, take some of your questions that you posed on things you wanted us to focus on tonight on the Shebeen. So, Sinead, that's what we're going to do tonight. Let us know where you're joining from. Where are you in the world? I'm in Cork, in Ireland, and I am drinking a small drop of the new Dingle 10-year-old. I was lucky enough to get a small little sample. I also bought a bottle of it. This Dingle 10-year-old, I only just touched my lips with it in the last few minutes. So over the next half hour or so, I'll give you some feedback as I'm sipping on it and thinking about it and let you know my thoughts on this monumental release, this 10-year-old single malt from Dingle, which will form a good part of our conversation tonight and the rise of craft distilling, spearheaded in large part by Dingle. Jason says, no glasses and a hat. What the Irish whiskey is going on? See, Jason, normally about an hour before we go live, I have the time to fix my hair, get changed, clean my glasses, sit down, be ready. I've spent the last hour and a half trying to fix the camera and to no avail. I've been stuck with technology, trying all kinds of cables. Every time I try and connect my camera, it shuts down my browser. So it's going to take longer than an hour and a half to fix. So don't worry, it's still me. Like there's no doppelgangers. Like it's still me here anyway. So we'll struggle on. We'll power on. All right, we got lots of great whiskies in the group being poured tonight. Jameson Orange and Ginger, Yellow Spot, Waterford Gaia, Green Spot, a Sexton Arnold Palmer, no less, a fresh bottle of Phoenix, Powers Rye, Jameson Black Barrel Proof, Killowen Rum and Raisin, fantastic. Mike and, there's Mike joining us from Ennis tonight. Good man. Mike and Chris and Ennis. Hope your trip across Ireland is going well. Bob is saying staunch from Massachusetts. Also Powers Irish Rye in the glass. I had a sip of it the other night. again, actually had it out in Cork at the Oval Bar in Cork at a pint of Beamish, and then I had a nice drop, a nice bit of Powers Rye. I have a drop here as well. I really enjoy Powers Rye. I think it's a lovely drop of whiskey. Peter Stewart's joining us from Belfast. Mark McKenzie, bottle of Limavady single malt on Cape Cod. Very good. And have I rebooted my computer? Asks Bob. Yes, I have rebooted my computer. And yeah, that's my first go-to, because I know that solves it 9 times out of 10, doesn't it? But it seems to be a browser issue to do with our streaming software, our camera, something uploaded or updated somewhere on one of the things, and there wasn't enough time. By the time midnight Irish time came around, it still wasn't fixed, and we had to jerry rig a solution together. All right. So the rise of craft distilling is our focus tonight. But before we get into that, I want to remind you of some of the updates on our website and some of the new features we uploaded to storiesandsips.com this week. If it's your first time joining us, I host the Stories and Sips Whiskey Club in addition to the Shebeen every Sunday, and it is a club of Irish whiskey enthusiasts predominantly around the United States, where we have regularly scheduled events, virtual events, sometimes in-person events, whiskey tastings, exclusive club bottlings, and we add information, content, and videos, interviews, etc. to our website to keep you up to date on Irish whiskey and help you get to the bottom of the challenges associated with understanding the depths of Irish whiskey. This week, we had a question about what chill filtering is. We uploaded that to our website, a video with Dave McCabe, blender from Middleton Distillery, who goes into great detail to answer what chill filtering is, what the process is like in Middleton Distillery, how they do it, how it applies to their whiskey. So if that's something that's of interest to you, check that out on our website, storiesandsips.com. We also have a feature on grain whiskey. There was a question that we got in our whiskey club. Somebody wanted to know what single grain whiskey was and what the difference between single grain whiskey was and grain whiskey. So we've explained the differences and what the definitions are for single grain whiskey. That's available on our storiesandsips.com on our website. We also have a great interview between Mark McLaughlin and Dahi O'Connell on the business of sourcing, maturing, and vatting casks. So if you have ever wondered what it takes to build a whiskey bonding business, Dahi O'Connell goes into great detail as to how he started it and how he selects casks and what he's looking for and what he's working on currently. So that's an interesting interview, and that's a video interview available also on Stories and Sips. If you happen to be in Ireland on Monday next, not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow, on April 24th, do let me know, because for the first time ever, we are lining up all of the Stories and Sips whiskey bottlings in one place. The Cork Whisky Society have asked me to present our bottlings. They have been accumulating our Stories and Sips bottles, and we're going to do a tasting of every Stories and Sips whiskey alongside one another for the first time in Ireland, only because they have all the bottles, and most of these are no longer available. They long sold out, but we're going to taste them side by side in Cork. So if you're in Cork and you're interested in attending that next week, let me know, and we might be able to get you into that. So do let me know. But that's an exciting opportunity for other people to taste our whiskies that haven't tasted them before, club members of the Cork Whisky Society, which is interesting. All right, let us move on to new Irish whiskies. I'm going to minimize myself here because you don't need to be looking at me. But before we do, just some feedback on the Dingle whiskey, Dingle 10-year-old single cask, because it is one of our... Actually, you know what? I'll wait till we talk about it. Three whiskies to focus on this week that I wanted to bring to your attention. Some weeks there are no releases, then other weeks there are 10 releases. This week there are 3 releases to get in front of you and to talk about. There was a time when I started in the world of Irish whiskey back in 2016 that we could have gone 2-3 months without a whiskey being released. Those days are gone, and I don't think we'll see them again. Hopefully, touch wood, anytime soon. The rate of whiskey releases exceeds any individual's capacity to keep up, but we'll do our best. And some of these whiskies fly below the radar. I don't always get press releases, or I don't always see that they're released, and other people let me know, hey, this whiskey popped up. Sometimes we'll have heard of the producer, other times we won't, because it might be a third-party bottler or a supermarket chain that has released an own brand. Some of those things that disappear in China or Spain that will never see anywhere else, maybe not really worth bringing to your attention, but those that hopefully are relevant, or that we think are relevant or worth talking about, we'll certainly bring to your attention every week as well. The first one is the Dingle Distillery 10-year-old single malt, which released this week. Only 237 bottles in one single cask. It's the first age statement Dingle that has been released from the distillery. The distillery has never sourced whiskey. It has always only released its own whiskey. It funded its operations while whiskey was maturing through the production of a very popular gin and vodka, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But this is a momentous release. It is a beautiful release. First of all, it is a beautifully housed whiskey in a stunning presentation box, which weighs more than the bottle itself, handmade from wood, and really is a beautiful, snug fitting box for the Dingle 10-year-old. I have the bottle here, and it is a whiskey that has spent the last 10 years in one single bourbon barrel. It is released at an ABV of 58.1%, and it did go on sale at the very, 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 very expensive price of €385. Now, that is a astonishing price for a 10-year-old whiskey, but my understanding is that it is priced based on its importance and its significance, and also its packaging, which by all accounts makes up a third of the price. It's not for the faint of heart, but it did sell out very quickly in the course of about an hour or an hour and a half. Dingle was the first distillery back in 2012 to kickstart the independent distilling revolution that we're going to talk about tonight, and craft distilling. It is a momentous moment that this has reached the market, whether it's for our pocketbooks or it's not, is beside the point. That it signifies the first time that we have an independent distillery reaching double digits in terms of their age of their whiskey. Now, while Dingle started the resurgence in 2012, it would be a few years before another distillery came along, and then a few years before another one. We'll talk more about that as we go on the course of tonight, but this did sell out quickly. And I think the website crashed for a significant period of time too, as people tried to get hold of it. Such was the demand. There's a lot of love for Dingle. There's a lot of love for Dingle, the town. There's a lot of love for the people of Dingle. There's a lot of love for the people behind the distillery. There may be few distilleries in Ireland with as strong an emotional connection and an emotional bond with its audience, and that was reflected in how quickly this sold this week. So that's something to acknowledge, or to recognize, when you think about this price and how quickly it sold out. So that was the first whiskey that we want to bring to your attention from the new Irish whiskies that were released over the course of the last week. Next up is one of the oldest single grains we've seen in quite a long time. It's a 15-year-old single grain released by Teeling Whiskey, 50% ABV. And this was aged in a bourbon barrel, but also I think a Sauvignon Blanc cask. Let me pull this up because it was quite interesting. Details here. Nothing's working for me tonight. I had a whole sheet of notes that aren't pulling up as well. We'll have to wing it. We're going to wing it. Yeah, so this is a ex-Bordeaux Sauvignon Blanc cask. So matured in bourbon and then finished in an ex-Bordeaux Sauvignon Blanc cask, €110. So available at the distillery and online. Also, James Fox, for example, has some stock of that. I saw him advertising it during the week. We got a lot of Teeling fans in the audience as well. I know when we did our Whiskey Bus tour there in last August and September, the line in the shop at the end of our tour of Teeling was significant, and a significant sum of money was dropped in Teeling from those trying to get distillery exclusives and bottles signed by the distiller that couldn't be got elsewhere as well. T. Cody says, I'm looking forward to trying a Dingle 10-year-old once they release an affordable version. Yeah, I think so too. I think this spirit is definitely showing fantastic development over the single malts that have been released in batches over the last 6 years. The Dingle single malts have been an evolution. They haven't all, each batch that was released since batch one wasn't necessarily 1 year older than the previous. There was always young stock co-mingled or vatted in with a little bit older stock. So it wasn't that you started with a 4-year-old, then you got a 5-year-old in batch two, or a 6-year-old in batch 3, a 7-year-old in batch 4. It didn't go like that. But what you started to see was an evolution in the maturation and also the different cask types. This is a single cask, just a bourbon barrel that was used for its maturation. And I can instantly, the Dingle DNA shines through, but I'm starting to get more now of the orchard fruits and more of the softer notes that might have been masked in the younger batches. And 10 years is being worn well on this spirit. It's mellower, and even at a cask strength of 58%, I'm getting a lot of, I'm getting a mixture of kind of white pepper meeting apricot, some butterscotch, a little hint of banana in there as well. A bit of banana bread coming through, a little bit of marmalade as well. So if this is the direction and a sign of things to come, I think we're in for some nice whiskies. There's been some interesting releases from Dingle over the past few weeks as well, or past few months, which is their celebration of the seasons. We had Baoilleach and Samhain were their most recent releases, or Breda. There were 3 releases, weren't there, over the past 2 releases? Anyway, they have a seasonal series where they'll release, I think, 4 whiskies or 5 whiskies each year over the next 2 years. That'll form a kind of a complete calendar of seasonal celebrations that are celebrated in Dingle each year. All right, so that's our second whiskey here, Teeling. Our third whiskey is Dunville's blended Irish whiskey, 40% ABV, the Dead Island 2 Irish whiskey. This is an unusual one. It comes from Cologne Distillery. It's to coincide with the release on April 21st. So in 4 days time, Dead Island 2, a very popular by all accounts video game, will be released. And this is the official whiskey that is featured in the game and also is released outside of the game and is available for pre-order now on Ecklenville's website. Very affordable. It's a mixture of malt, pot still, and grain whiskey. So all 3 styles of Irish whiskey blended together, bottled at 40% ABV, fairly affordable. And Dunville's website will let you know where it can ship. For those of you who are in the United States, I know that Dunville's or Ecklenville can arrange in various ways to get your whiskey to you. So if you need any help with that, let us know. If anyone's tried any older Dingle spirits as well, because I see some comments, let me know as well. And if there's any Dead Island 2 players or Dead Island players in the audience, let us know if this resonates. Somebody messaged me during the week and said, like, this is a big deal in the world of gaming. And this game has been 10 years in the making. It's supposed to have been released every year for the past 10 years, and it has not been. And so it's been much anticipated. So the hope is that the whiskey is going to be see a bit of a boost, and Irish whiskey will be heroed because of the interest in the game. All right. If you're just joining us, let us know what you're drinking, what's in your glass. What we would appreciate as well is if you could like and share this live stream. All we ask is for a like on the YouTube stream and click the share button or the subscribe button if you don't mind, and it helps more people get in touch with Irish whiskey and fall in love with Irish whiskey, hopefully. And do keep us posted on what you're drinking. All right. Yeah, there's a lovely pepper spice. You know, sometimes when you're in a restaurant and they've got little pepper sachets and they've got little white pepper sachets, and you can even smell it before you open it. You smell that white pepper. And our nose and our taste are so closely linked that this Dingle whiskey has that wonderful flavor of the smell of white pepper, which some of you will get that now instantly and go, I know exactly what that means, but that it's not overpowering. It's not harsh. It's fragrant. It's a spice that is quite welcome and blends very well with the banana and the orange that I'm getting through now on this single malt. All right. Let us move along. I want to talk about the rise of craft distilling tonight, and I want to talk about it because Dingle's release here, this 10-year-old release, is the start of a avalanche in the best way, a landslide in the best way of releases that we're going to see over the next decade. Dingle in 2012 broke the mold. The distillery is still located in the same place, in the same tin shed that it was founded in, which is an old sawmill just outside the town of Dingle in County Kerry, one of the most southwesterly distilleries in Ireland. It is a small, compact little place, and it is home to all of the whiskey that is released with the name Dingle on it, all the gin and all the vodka in the world that is released with the name Dingle on it comes from this one single shed just outside the town of Dingle. And this release of this 10-year-old whiskey tells us that, or reminds us that, first of all, it reminds us how quickly time is flying, because I remember when that distillery launched in 2012, and it was before I was interested in whiskey, but I was trying to get a group of people together to invest in a cask. I say invest, was to buy a cask of whiskey. I saw stories in all the newspapers in Ireland. I was living in the United States, saw stories about this Founding Fathers program, which captured the attention of a lot of people, basically saying, look, we're trying to do something mad and crazy in Ireland. We're trying to build a distillery, but we need your money to do it. Would you ever put up whatever it was, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 at the time, and help us build this distillery? In return, you'll get a cask with your name on it. And there was no such thing as a cask program in Ireland at the time. This was the first one, and it caught a lot of people's attention, a lot of Irish expats, the diaspora around the world, and hundreds and hundreds of people did. Now, I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together and couldn't afford a barrel of whiskey. I tried to recruit 5, 6, 7, 8 of my friends, I remember, in Ohio at the time, and I couldn't convince enough people to come in on this barrel of whiskey with me. And I wish we had it today, because now we'd have a 10-year-old whiskey, which we could all share. We'd have 270 odd bottles that we could split between 5 or 6 of us. It couldn't be done. But I remember when I got into Irish whiskey in 2016 and reconnecting with Dingle, I had forgotten completely about that Founding Fathers program. And then I remember going through my emails, searching for Dingle. I was like, I know Dingle. How do I know Dingle? And I found the emails where I had communicated with Dingle, asking if a group of us could come in on this together. And they were saying, of course you can, no problem at all. Just never materialized. But Dingle, the founders of Dingle Distillery, who we went into detail on last week, Oliver Hughes, Peter Mosley, they made a big bet in 2012, and they invested their money and other people's money in a dream and a vision for this town of Dingle that didn't make any sense really on the surface of it. It's in a hard to reach place. The logistics of getting ingredients in and whiskey out are very difficult. It's inhospitable in the winter, and the summer it's overrun with tourists, but it is one of the most beautiful parts of the world. And they had a dream, and they built this distillery, and it captured a following. And the first releases, batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, were chased and hounded, and people wanted to collect every Dingle whiskey that ever came out. And there's still a very vocal audience that supports the distillery and supports everything that they do. They signify for many the start of the craft distilling revolution in Ireland. I want to define it. I want you to define it. I want to think about it tonight. I want us to, the reason I bring it up is certainly spurred by the release of this 10-year-old single malt, but it's also a reminder to us of kind of a follow-on from what we presented last week, which was the range of family-owned and operated distilleries, the overlap on the Venn diagram of family-run distilleries and craft distilleries. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap because individuals are trying new things. Individuals are taking risks. Individuals and families are pursuing flavor in ways that maybe bigger operators can't or don't want to, or are too busy fulfilling existing demands on their production for more, let's say, market-friendly whiskies or mainstream whiskies. But we should not forget that the thing I think that gets us most interested in Irish whiskey, gets me most interested, is not the mass production at an industrial scale of whiskey. It's the people behind whiskey production. It's the individuals with dreams and with visions doing interesting things that we connect with. I find it very difficult to connect with chrome and copper and automated processes. But I do connect with all day long are people who are passionate at any size of the industry, at any size of a distillery, and people who have time to share their what gets them excited and something they've maybe discovered and they're trying to bring to market as well. And I think that's what we're finding in family run distilleries, especially. And that's where we're finding this craft movement emerging out of. So we're going to talk about that tonight. What we want to do, first of all, is kind of define, well, what is craft? It's not a legally defined term. Craft distilling isn't defined legally in Ireland. It's not legally defined in the United States. It's a bit like the craft beer movement. It's a bit like the phrase small batch. It's a bit like the phrase finishing with whiskey. There's no legal definition, so it leaves it a little bit open or a lot open for definition or for determination per your own requirements or your own kind of interests. So it's something we're going to talk about, and I don't want to define it for you. I'll tell you what I think it is, but I think we'll find that craft distilling is less of a definition that we can carve in stone and more of a vibe, a feeling, something emotional and something intangible. And that's where I think we'll land, but we'll go through it anyway and we'll talk about it, and you can let me know what you think as we go through it. So the American Craft Spirits Association does define it themselves, not legally binding, of course, but they define it as a craft distillery as follows: a distillery who values the importance of transparency in distilling and remains forthcoming regarding their use of ingredients, their distilling location and process, bottling location and process, and aging process. And I think those are terms and definitions we can probably rally around and say, yeah, that pretty much fits the bill. Now, some you'll say, well, it gets a little bit blurred, or I'd still allow this business to be a craft distillery, or this one, even though they fulfill all of these, doesn't quite fit the bill. But that's how the American Craft Spirits Association defines it. So I suppose if you're a member of that and you want to call yourself a craft distillery, these are things they'll look for the check marks on. There's no real definition in the Irish whiskey world. There's no association that has said, here's what you have to be. But you'll find even in the United States, it varies. Here's another definition, which comes from the American Distilling Institute. And they say craft spirits are the products of an independently owned distillery. And they even go so far as to define the maximum annual output or sales, 52,000 cases, which is quite specific, where the product is physically distilled and bottled on site. So they say nothing there now about transparency. They don't say anything about, they don't even say where it should be matured. So they have quite a kind of a slight variation on the definition there compared to the American Craft Spirits Association. So that's interesting too, because when I posed this question with a few friends earlier today, what do they think is the meaning of craft? One comment was, well, it definitely can't be owned by people outside of those who founded it. So I think this is where it gets tricky, because you could argue that many distilleries that are run by families maybe got friends and relations to write checks and put savings in, and they're owners, and maybe the friends and family are bigger owners than the family. So the founders. So it becomes a little bit tricky to fully define. Here's another definition that I kind of like when it comes to it, where it's asking this question about the difference in craft production and mass production. In many industries, craft manufacturing began to be replaced by mass production in the 19th century. Mass production involves producing goods in high volume and low variety, the opposite of craft manufacturing, where customers are expected to buy what is supplied when it comes to mass production, rather than goods made to their own specifications. So that's an interesting one as well, this idea that mass production is making something that you then tell the market this is what it is, and you find the people who want to drink it. Craft producing or craft distilling being, we're going to make a thing based on what we know people want, or we hear from the market they're looking to drink or looking to enjoy. Again, blurred lines all around here as we kind of dive into it. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what would you consider craft production to be? Or can you think of a distillery or a brand in Ireland that to you is a craft maker, a craft distillery, a craft brand, a craft producer? And what would make sense to you, or what would you argue with if a brand said we're a craft producer? Would you argue with the number of cases they produced every year? Would you argue with its ownership? Would you argue with its transparency? So it's kind of a little bit tricky there. And I'm not sure we're all going to align and land on kind of the same definition. I'll tell you where I land on it. For me, it's less about the number of cases that are sold, definitely. For me, it is about transparency. It's about connection. In other words, if there are 100 layers between me and the founder, it's not a craft distillery to me. I'd like to think that as a consumer, I could reach the owner if I wanted to. Now, that's not great for the owner who's going to be reached by everybody, but that's another element that I think is kind of the contactability or the connection that they still maintain. So when you go to a craft fair or a whiskey fair and or a conference or a whiskey show, is it the owners that are pouring the whiskey, or is it the hired help, or is it a mixture of both? So transparency, connection, craft as well, to me, would signify something a little bit different in terms of they're following a vision and a perhaps purpose that's greater than the product itself or greater than profit alone. So often in the world of craft brewing and craft distilling, and I've spoken to lots of businesses over the years who got into left corporate jobs to start something like a craft business, and I'd wonder, and they often share the same kind of outlook, which was not that they started the business to become rich. It was often they thought that something could be made better, or they wanted to give employment to their area, or they were passionate about this thing that they wanted to devote their life to perfecting. Profit kind of came later. So that's another aspect of it, I think, that matters as well, which is that the purpose is greater than profit alone. Now, craft distilleries and craft breweries can sell out and become part of bigger corporations, as we see all day long. Anheuser-Busch and InBev and Diageo, own so many breweries and distilleries that it's hard to keep up with. So it's an interesting one. But I see some interesting kind of descriptions and definitions coming in here. Rich says craft to me stands for small batches of very good and unique liquor. Yeah, unique is interesting, isn't it? Like something that you're doing that nobody else is doing. Steve says ownership, transparency, experimentation. Yeah, experimentation is a good one, isn't it? What are they doing that's different? And have they the capacity, the capabilities, the flexibility to be able to move quicker, to be able to do things quicker, fail faster, fail forward kind of a thing, whereas a larger company could take them a lot longer to change course or to move away from their prescribed course that they've been on for quite a while. Cian says, I would agree with Matt that you need to factor in the passion of the people. And while volume is always a factor, we can't dismiss larger companies if the individual connection is still there. And Matt saying that craft defines a product where an individual's craft can be seen, tasted, felt in the final product. That's a great definition too, that craft is something we can feel because it's the craft of the crafter, the maker, the producer, the distiller, the blender, that person who put their craft and their skill on the line for us to evaluate. Interestingly, Brian Nation, actually there's Laurie now. So Laurie, Whiskey Chats podcast, he was talking to Brian Nation, a master distiller from formerly of Middleton, now of O'Shaughnessy Distilling, who mentioned that he thought that Brian Nation said Middleton Distillery is a craft producer, and that volume, it wasn't about volume, it was about experimentation and what they're able to do even at that scale. Laurie reckons craft production is not a size definition. It's an operation that has an emphasis on hands-on production at all levels, as opposed to an automated production process. I think that's a good definition too. And Lisa says, yes to a lot. Also when the ownership is directly involved, same as Laurie. The production owner is the distiller, owner is the blender, owner is the bonder, or other pairings. So that's quite interesting, that we all have we're all in the same kind of a vein. It's a vibe, it's a feeling, but there are some things we want to see in place. And it's almost like with all of these things, there's none of them that are wrong because they're all personal to us and subjective. But I bet it's one of those things that we know it when it's not there. So we look at a distillery, we might look at Sam Adams in Boston and say, they're not craft anymore. They're long past being a craft brewery. Or we might look at you can name any brewery that has been acquired, and you might say, or a distillery that's been acquired, and say, no, they're no longer craft because they're now guided by quarterly earnings or guidance on quarterly earnings or 17 layers, or the owners, the founders are no longer involved. They've been replaced by machines, robots, etc. Craft is hands-on, and each batch is slightly different, as Peter. Interesting, isn't it? So I think we're all kind of in the same vibe, same vein. We know it when we see it. We know it when we don't see it, but we know there are things that are important that are in place. So with that in mind, we'll talk a little bit about some of the craft distillers that are doing interesting things in Ireland. We can't exhaustively cover them all, but I want to highlight them because I think the craft distilleries are the key to introducing more people to Irish whiskey who may be interested in things beyond shots at 2 o'clock in the morning, more interested than just mixing drinks. And all of those have their place. We never criticize shot consumption. Let's be honest. It drives the Irish whiskey industry. We're nothing without it. But we're also kind of gathering here on a Sunday night and gathering at whiskey festivals and go to whiskey talks and attend tastings, not to know how to shoot whiskey and not to know how to mix it. Often we go to sip and understand how it was made. And the beauty of us all coming together in this pursuit, this lifelong pursuit of knowledge, is that we are kind of, in our own way, kind of craft consumers, because we too want to know how it's made, just like the craft producers want to be the ones making it and want us to know how it's made. So that's where there's a great intersection. So these smaller, independent, mostly craft producers are a gateway for new consumers to enter into the Irish whiskey world, I think, and maybe have a greater potential of going up the ladder and rising up and maybe acquiring or buying and tasting further up the brand, or expanding their palates and their interests across more craft distilleries across the island once they've tried one. All right. So let's remind ourselves, many of you will be familiar with this, remind ourselves of the rise in Irish whiskey production, and therefore, and consequently, the rise in craft distilleries and craft distilling over the past number of years. There are now 40 plus distilleries on the island of Ireland. It's not that long ago that Irish whiskey was on its knees. In 1985, there were 2 distilleries on the island of Ireland. So I am old enough to remember a time when there were 2 distilleries on the island of Ireland: Middleton on the south coast and Bushmills on the north coast. Those were the only 2 distilleries, whiskey distilleries, operating on the island of Ireland. 2012, another, almost 30 years later, there were still only 4 distilleries. Now you had Cooley Distillery, you had Kilbeggan Distillery. Now you also had West Cork Distillery, but I don't think they were producing whiskey at that time. They were producing all kinds of other spirits. They were about to start producing whiskey. But 2012, still only 4 distilleries. Just 10 years later, there were 40 distilleries. Now 2023, 45, 46, depends on where we count, how we count. There are about 45 distilleries today. That's massive growth in a really short period of time. And look at what happened in 2012. Dingle Distillery came about. Dingle Distillery was founded. So we could say Dingle inspired people. We could say that the demand for Irish whiskey was also growing for the bigger brands, the Jamesons, the Powers, the Tullamore Dews, the Bushmills of the world at the time, and that also created avenues for the smaller brands to go out into the world. And that may be the case. Or it could be the other way around, that the interest in, or the inspiration from the likes of Dingle and from people and the passion from people also created and helped push that demand. I think those 2 things are both true at the same time. So that just gives you some sense of how quickly this market has grown and is still growing. There are far more than 45 distilleries in Ireland. There are 45 GI compliant approximately distilleries in Ireland. There are whiskey distilleries in Ireland. There are other distilleries that don't make whiskey at all, that make absinthe, make gin, make apple brandy, make poitín, make Irish spirits, but they don't make whiskey. So this is just the number of whiskey distilleries on the island today. So Cooley Distillery in the late 1980s, 86, 87, John Teeling is the man who bought a potato alcohol plant, which was used, a government-owned potato alcohol plant, which was used to create kind of a neutral grain spirit, industrial grain spirit, really, that was being exported primarily. John Teeling bought this factory with the intention of converting it into a whiskey distillery back in the late 1980s. And you could also argue that Dingle wasn't the first craft distillery. You could argue that Cooley might in itself be the first craft distillery of modern times. Now, if we go back to the 1800s, where we could say they're all craft distilleries, aren't they? Because all of these, the smaller, non-big urban industrial distilleries were all craft distilleries. But we're talking about modern times, or certainly in our lifetime. Cooley Distillery in the late 1980s could be credited with being a craft distillery because they broke the monopoly of the big distilleries, the Bushmills, the Irish distillers. So Irish Distillers was the monopoly at the time, because Middleton and Bushmills were both part of the same consortium, the same company at that time. Cooley came in and said, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Irish distillers didn't like that particularly. And there was times when they tried to buy them out, shut them down, etc. But Cooley Distillery, with the release of single malts, with their production of peated whiskey for the first time in generations in Ireland, could be seen as, well, they themselves are the ones that kind of kickstarted an interest in Irish whiskey back in the 1980s and 1990s. So we shouldn't overlook what is today a big, massive conglomerate-owned distillery owned by Beam Suntory. But I think there's a lot of credit due to John Teeling for what he did back in the 1980s too. But it is Dingle, as we mentioned, is the one that kickstarted. Triple distillation, 3 copper pots. At the time of their launch back in 2012, and for I think a good few years afterwards, I believe the number was a barrel a week, I think, or maybe 2 barrels a week maximum that they were making. All hands-on, nothing automated. Everyone there employed from the locality. Some of them had never worked in distilleries before, were suddenly distilling and brewing and learning from people who came in to kind of advise. But that's our starting point, really. And many of you will be familiar with the various batches of Dingle, and they really are the first craft Irish whiskies in the last 15 years, the early batches of Dingle. Now, some of those, you might argue, they're a different whiskey or a different spirit than we might be used to today. And some of those, I'll be the first to say, they were quite harsh. Those early batches of Dingle whiskey, they take some getting used to. But as the spirit evolved, and now their wood management program, I think, is starting to show great fruits in how the distillate and the spirit is being maneuvered through cask management. I think that's helping the spirit as well. Plus the fact that these whiskies are getting older and having a chance to actually spend some time in wood rather than being released at 3 or 4 or 5 years of age. But Dingle Distillery really is the one that we kind of tip our hat to. It's not the reason I'm wearing a hat. It's just because you should see my hair to frighten you. Dingle Distillery were the first ones, and so we salute them. Cian is sticking with the Baoilleach. He's drinking that now. He's onto the son, the father and the son. We've got some Baoilleach here as well. Cian, I'll have a drop of this as well when we get to it, which is the crater. The crater. Poitin as well. We'll talk about that. What did the early craft distilleries do to keep their lights on while they were making whiskey? Well, Dingle created the model for many distilleries. It created a number of models. The first model it created was the funding of the construction of a distillery through a cask program. The Founding Fathers program is probably still today the most successful pre-launch cask program that has existed in the world of Irish whiskey. But still, that just gets you distilling, buys you your barley, pays the staff to distill and to brew. You still have to pay for the warehousing, and you still have to wait at least 3, 4, 5 years to even get a return on, to be able to sell a drop of it, let alone buy your bottles, your corks, your labeling machines, and et cetera, et cetera. So Dingle created another model. So beyond the model that is the craft, or beyond the Founding Fathers barrel program, cask investment program, the second model they created was the distillation of gin and vodka while your whiskey is being matured. At the same time that there is a whiskey revolution, the early days of this whiskey revolution, 2012, 2013, 2014, there is a gin revolution that happened in Ireland. And I remember coming back from the United States, visiting Ireland and visiting family, and seeing people in bars with these big balloon glasses that look like oversized wine glasses filled with a fizzy, clear spirit, and had strands of cucumber and strips of grapefruit and fancy straws and all kinds of things in there. And it was gin and tonics that were presented in a way that got attention. And Dingle spearheaded that. Dingle gin and their big balloon glass got everyone talking, and it started a gin craze. And there was a time in the 2010s where you went into a bar in Ireland, you got a price list for all the drinks. You might have seen a cocktail list, and some bars even had a gin and tonic list. Choose your gin, choose your tonic, and choose your garnish. Notions for the Irish people to have such choice like that was beyond our capabilities to handle, I think. But in any case, the funding of the maturation and the keeping of the lights on, and the revenue generator to this day for many of these distilleries is the gin and vodka program. And Dingle definitely set that in place. The gin is still ubiquitous in Ireland today, and of course, every bar in Dingle town wanted to have spirits with the name of their town on them. So everyone, all the 50 pubs in Dingle, all wanted Dingle vodka, Dingle gin, Dingle things to sell and be proud of, especially when tourist season came around as well. So that's how they funded their construction, their maturation, and in some cases their expansion as well. Next up is Killowen Distillery. So I'm going to take away this comment here. But first, let me have a little sip. Many of you will be familiar with Cologne Distillery. There's a bottle here somewhere. This is a bottle of the Baron Tool, their own release, 3-year-old single pot still. This was released in the last few months. Cologne Distillery in the foothills of the Mourne Mountains in County Down, just not far from Newry, north of the border, is I would argue, the definition of a craft distillery. It is it checks all the boxes. This is where you've got the owner who is the distiller, the owner who is the bottler, the owner who is marrying it all together, the owner who's on social media, the owner who's probably in the comments here tonight, the owner who is the one pouring the whiskies at tastings, festivals, etc., the owner who is doing the interviews, the owner who is paying the bills, and that owner is Brendan Carty. And Cologne Distillery for a long time was the smallest distillery in Ireland, a feat surpassed since by Baoilleach Distillery, I think. It distilled its first spirit the same week that Clonakilty Distillery distilled theirs. It became the 24th distillery in Ireland at the time. At Clonakilty, I think the 25th, or whichever way you'd like to look at it. And Killowen now has been distilling for a little over, I think about 4 years. It is a tiny operation. You see Brendan opening the doors of a room that you might have trouble parking a car in. And the picture there on the right are the 2 stills that operate the distillery. There's another grain column still that Brendan has recently purchased as well. That's going to form part of their distilling efforts. But to give you a sense of the size of this in terms of craft, the stills you're looking at there, on the left is a 1,000-litre still, on the right is an 800-litre still. Compare this, one of Ireland's smallest distilleries, to Ireland's largest distillery being Middleton, where the largest copper pot stills in Middleton are 80,000 litres. So 1,000 litres versus 80,000 litres. And that gives you a sense of the chasm in terms of the range, the spectrum of size of distilleries that exist on the island of Ireland today. Pro rata by size of the still to number of people interested, I reckon that Brendan Carty and Killowen have as many people interested in Killowen as Middleton has in their own whiskies, and for good reason. Brendan checks all the boxes of transparency. So if I was to take this bottle here as an example, this is Baron Tool Irish whiskey, which was released in September 2022. It's cask number 2. It's a single cask. So the information that I'm reading on the bottle, distilled in May 19. All right, so just over 3.5 years old. 345 bottles, got the usual details, right? ABV and size. But if I was to grab the box of it, which I should have kept to hand, okay, here it is. I'll get a lot more information on this release. So here's the little box that it comes in. And I think if I'm to pop out this little bit on the inside, it'll give me a breakdown of the mash bill. You can see this is a well-rehearsed show we have here, like everything ready to go. Come on out. You're just going to have to trust me. Oh, here we go. We almost have it. Brendan, you need a bigger box. We got to get this out. I'm not great at opening things. I was trying to open the crater from Baoilleach Distillery, the wax seal during the week. I was using a potato peeler. Here we have it. We have it. Nobody panic. We almost have it. Hey! All right. So this is some of the information that you'll see on Brendan's releases. So the mash bill, for example, a little bit tough to see now in our terrible camera that we've got going on. But I'll read it out to you. So the mash bill is 8 bags of malted barley. Did you ever see a description of that? Bags. 8 bags of malted barley, 4.5 bags of smoked malted barley, 1 bag of malted Maris otter barley, a 1/4 bag of oats, and a 1/4 bag of wheat. Then wild fermentation, domestic, open top, outdoor fermentation, distillation, very slowly, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. He's telling you the times he's distilling. 1,000-liter still, the wash still, and then the 800-liter spirit still. They were 60% full. The wash still was 60% full, and the spirit still was only 50% full. And worm tub condensed. Worm tub is where there's a coil inside that turns the liquid into vapor by putting this coil into a cool container, and then maturation in a 200-liter ex-bourbon cask. So transparency out the wazoo, maybe so much transparency that he gets into trouble sometimes. And Brendan's got into trouble for being kind of outspoken about distilling and outspoken about what should be done in terms of legal definitions and the legal technical file around Irish whiskey. But no one will ever doubt Brendan's commitment and Brendan's dedication to historic production methods, to flavor and the pursuit of it, and the pursuit and the insistence on transparency. So which is why we're celebrating and heroing Killowen tonight, and we will continue to do so. And if you pay close attention over the next few months, you will, fingers crossed, see a Stories and Sips cask from Cologne Distillery of their own spirit, their own whiskies that we'll be able to get and release, especially for you, our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club members, that will be quite unique and will follow the transparency that's on this bottling here. This is bottle number 299 at 343. And those of you who've tasted Killowen whiskies will recognize the flavors like nothing else you've had before. So when it comes to craft, like a distillery like Midleton Distillery, and we won't use them as the antithesis of craft by any stretch of the imagination tonight, but I mentioned Midleton, for example, when you talk about production capacity, largest production capacity in Ireland, more liters of pure alcohol produced in that distillery than all other distilleries in Ireland combined. Yet there's no way they could operate their stills at 50% because they wouldn't be able to meet the demands of the market. So they're already running not far off 100% capacity. So much so they have to build a second distillery and double their capacity in the next 18 months. So this idea of low and slow, kind of low fill, slow fermentation, slow distillation times, these are the preserve of the craft distillers who are the most inefficient makers of whiskey on the island. They lose money every single day. They leave money on the table every single day in the pursuit of flavor, in the pursuit of their passion, and in the pursuit of doing something unique and something that gets talked about, but something that they're proud of. And that's what makes all the difference. So when we see these, all this transparency, it's telling us the lengths they've gone to. I would factor that in when it comes to pricing. because it's so inefficient, because it's so hard to make whiskey this way, we have to pay for it. And that's a choice for us now. We can pay $20 for a bottle of Hellcat Maggie from the bottom shelf at Kroger or Trader Joe's or wherever you pick it up. Nothing wrong with it. More power to the producers of Hellcat Maggie, whoever they are. Or we can pay, what's this? The equivalent of about $140, $150 for a 500 milliliter bottle. Our value, where we put value is up to us, and how it transfers is kind of something we get to decide what's important to us. And I think that typically the people who gather to talk about Irish whiskey, taste Irish whiskey, learn about its production, are typically the ones who spend more on bottles. Not that that's what you have to do, or that flavor can't be found at $20. It can, but we're looking for something different when we go after this, but we have to pay for it to get it. Laurie says that Brendan's also putting in one more wash still in the old maturation room off the minibar in the distillery. It's great news. I have a great video. I have to put it up in our Facebook community of the drive to get to Killowen. So somebody wanted to know recently why on our whiskey bus last August we didn't go to Cologne Distillery. And the answer was because we couldn't get a bus up the road. And I think a lot of our audience couldn't understand what I meant by that, because there's no equivalent. There's no American equivalent. I don't know if I can find this video. Let me see if I can, because there we go, videos. It has to be seen to be believed. I got stuck. It was like such a pure Irish moment. I got stuck behind a tractor as well, going up the hill. I'm sure I have it here now. Meanwhile, keep your questions coming in there. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to put this up on the I'll just hold this up to the camera to give you a sense of, this is one of 3 videos I took of the drive up to Cologne. Let me take this off here. See the Mourne Mountains in the background there. Now, I'm in a small car, and this is a small road. Look, there's a tractor coming there. Let me go on to the next video. Here I am stuck behind the tractor. I couldn't have placed it there if I was a Hollywood movie director. I couldn't have placed it better. But you see the kind of the landscape that you're in here. Small, tight corners, farm country, 1-lane country roads. There's no way a bus gets up there, and if it does, it's not getting back. And then finally, I come around the corner to the distillery here. But it's beautiful countryside, but you're not getting a bus up there. Now you see on the right-hand side, this white building, that's the distillery there. That's Cologne Distillery on the right-hand side. I'll put these videos together and put them up on the website. So that checks everybody's boxes, surely, for craft distilling, right? Okay. Who's up next? Blackwater Distillery. All right. So we helped host a launch for Blackwater Distillery of their dirt grain Irish whiskies a few months ago. And that's available on Blackwater Distillery's YouTube page if you want to go check that out. Blackwater Distillery is a very small distillery in County Waterford, a stone's throw from the Cork border. And it is about a half-hour drive from Waterford City. And it does also check the box of craft distilling. This is a distillery that does not take what they do lightly when it comes to being authentic, being transparent. In fact, being so aligned or being so fastidious to their beliefs that we don't get to see their whiskey yet. You know, they've released samples of their whiskey, 4 or 5 different samples of their dirt grain whiskey not too long ago, and gave us a hint of what's coming. So Blackwater Distillery is run by Peter Mulryan, and he is a former whiskey writer and commentator and TV presenter who has jumped from commentating and on whiskies and doing videos for whiskey companies to now making his own whiskey and being another quite outspoken critic of other brands that maybe don't follow transparency and don't pursue an approach to flavor that he believes is within everyone's reach. If they were willing to sacrifice some profits in the short term, there's money to be made in the long term, and everyone can be happy and get a chance to taste Ireland in a glass. And so with Blackwater Distillery, they're sourcing only Irish grains. They are sourcing Irish peat that is smoked in Ireland. They are the first distillery in Ireland in probably 100 years to have released a whiskey, even though it was in very small quantities. Their dirt grain whiskey, that was their peated one, which I think was peated number 5 or 15, number 15, I think. They got a small batch of Irish peat, turf, and they got Irish barley, and they brought them to Irish craft malts that have a very small peat malting facility, and they were able to smoke the barley, the Irish barley, using Irish turf, and they were the first to release it. Now, Waterford Distillery, not too far away, were the first to release a whiskey that was made entirely with peated Irish barley, but it was peated in Scotland with Irish turf, if I'm not too confusing in my descriptions there. Blackwater are outspoken, Peter's outspoken, but they're also working on historical mash bills. So I think they fit all the categorizations there of craft. You haven't heard a lot about them in the United States. You will, but you won't hear about the name Blackwater Distillery because that is a trademark that is owned by somebody else. So when they come to the United States, which they intend to do in late 2023, early 2024, they'll come to market as dirt grain, DIRTGRAIN, dirt grain whiskey. And you'll see very small batches. They also have some sourced whiskey that's paying the bills and keeping the lights on, which is a Velvet Cap whiskey, which also I don't think has made it to the United States, but they're also making other spirits. So they collaborated with the aforementioned Killowen Distillery to produce a poitin. And this is a poitin that is a marrying of poitins made in Cologne and in Blackwater. So here you have two craft distilleries coming together saying, we've got two ways of doing things. Let's marry them together and we'll create a dough, which means two, Irish poitin. An all-island collaboration combining Knockshee oats and Waterford heritage barley and fusing the distinctive distilling characters of Killowen and Blackwater. 2 origins, 1 spirit. It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Just 472 bottles of this poitin, grown apart, married together. And again, even on the poitin, a focus on transparency. Look at the breakdown here on the back. 30% malted barley, 50% malted barley, 30% old Irish barley, locally sourced by Blackwater, then 15% oats, Killowen grown, locally malted, and 5% peated malt. Again, transparency, small batch, owner operated. In the case of Blackwater, it's not the owner, that's the distiller. They have a distiller that is an American distiller. So Peter's not the distiller there, but again, very, very hands-on, very hands-on. So they check the box. So here's one I want to talk about a little bit more, and I'm going to find out more about them because they've been in touch and they want us to know more about them. Burren Distillers, very off the radar, even to us in Ireland, certainly off the radar in the United States. The area of the Burren in County Clare and the west coast of Ireland is a well-known tourist destination for its landscape. If you've ever gone to the cliffs of Moher, you have driven through the Burren. It forms part of a kind of a Burren geological World Heritage Site. The Burren is an area of unique natural beauty, limestone, karst limestone surface. Famously, it is in many parts devoid of trees, devoid of anything except rock. Other parts of it have flora and that don't grow anywhere else in the world. When Oliver Cromwell invaded Ireland in the 1600s and was on a killing spree. He famously declared that in the Burren there isn't enough trees to hang a man, there isn't enough ground to bury a man, or enough water to drown a man, and that would describe a lot of the Burren. But Burren Distillers here, as you can see, is in surrounded by plenty of lovely lush farmland, and they look like they have no shortage of water there at all. Burren Distillers has been distilling since 2019. It's owned by a man called Noel O'Loughlin. He's from Ballyvaughan in County Clare, and together with Jack O'Shea, who's a famous, well-known Irish distiller who has helped build and advise on most of almost all the independent whiskey brands you've come across. Jack O'Shea has been involved in at some time or another. He's a big part of the Irish Whiskey Society in Ireland, and he's a well-known engineer and distiller. And Noel O'Loughlin has been in the drinks industry for a long time, and they have a unique approach to making whiskey. They have direct fire stills. In other words, they don't have heat exchangers. They light a fire underneath the copper pot stills, which creates all kinds of uneven heating. It allows for different reactions to happen within the still. They are unique in that of all the independent distilleries in Ireland, they have their own floor malting. So you see a picture on the right there. They're malting their own floor, or they're malting their floor. They're drying their own barley over a heat. So what's a malting floor? So you see the picture there, a man in boots with a rake and a pile of barley. So historically, when barley was taken out of the fields, after it was steeped in water and it started to sprout, what you need to do then is you need to stop the sprouting. You don't want it to keep growing. And so what you do is you take it out of the water. And historically, the old distilleries, if you ever do old distillery tours, like in the old Middleton Distillery or old Kilbeggan Distillery, you'll be taken through areas that show you the old malting floors, where they had floors that sacks of the malt were carried up and they were poured out onto the floor, which had perforated holes. The floor was perforated. And underneath the floors, there was a fire. It was typically a smokeless fuel. It could have been a coal, anthracite, for example, that was burning. And that dry heat coming up through the floors dried the barley. And these men would have come in their boots, and they would have worn these kind of shoes and boots that had big, thick soles so they didn't burn their feet on the hot floors. And they'd come in, they'd turn over the barley and they'd turn it over so that it would dry out and it would reach the desired moisture level before it was stored for a period of weeks or months before distilling it. That disappeared with the introduction of more controlled kilning and being able to put your barley into kilns that was more regulated, more consistent. But the Burren is doing things a little bit different. Basically, they have two farms that are growing their barley nearby, right, in fact, a couple of fields away from the distillery. They're growing their barley. They're bringing the barley into the distillery, where they are doing their own malting inside the distillery. They're then distilling it they've got wooden mash tuns. They've got wooden fermenters. So they're using wood as opposed to stainless steel. They've got 3 copper pots. So they're in copper pot distillation, 3 copper pots in there. And then they're aging their whiskies in ex-sherry casks, ex-muscat casks, a lot of wine casks. So Noel O'Loughlin's from the wine industry. He worked for many, many years in the wine industry. But they're distilling in a way that he calls it Shan Gael or Shan Irish whiskey, kind of old Irish style of whiskey. I don't know enough about it to know what it is, except that everything they're doing is expensive and slow and manual. And I want to go and figure it out. I want to go and understand it. And when I do, I'll come back and tell you all about it. So I'll reach out to Noel this week and we'll see if we can get a visit and get a little video tour maybe and understand a little bit more about what Burren Distillers are doing. They have never released a whiskey. They've been distilling for 4 years. I know people in our community who have bought casks of whiskey from Noel and they're laid down there. They've gone and visited them. They speak very highly of Noel and the operation. By all accounts, he is a mad scientist, which we need. We need these kind of these clever lunatics who think differently than the rest of us and operate on a different plane. I think that's where Noel is. And so Burren Distillers is a craft distillery in the heart of the Burren. Some other interesting businesses. There's a perfumery that's in the Burren. There's a interesting there's a salt company in the Burren. There's a lot of craft foods, craft approach to life really in the Burren, and I'd like to spend more time there. If any of you've been to the west of Clare, or anywhere County Clare really, but you get close to the coast there, absolutely beautiful part of the world. Stunning. Doolin, Ballyvaughan, Lahinch, fantastic. Nathan is not distilling. Nathan has been involved in a number of legal disputes amongst their directors that has prevented them from distilling. They have not even got close to distilling in Nathan, and I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of unhappy people who've invested in whiskies from Nathan Distillery in Mayo and have not gotten any word on whether they'll ever see their money or their whiskey, and it's a bit of a sad situation. Last I heard was that out of court agreements had been made where the directors were in agreement about some kind of direction, but I don't know what that is. But in all the while, this big, expensive distillery has been sitting, waiting completion in the foothills of the Navan Mountain. So they're not distilling. They're not distilling. Jason says Jack O'Shea's name is on Sailor's Home bottles. It is. Jack O'Shea was the main advisor to the Sailor's Home company on their whiskey. He's involved. He's been involved in a lot. He worked for Pierce Lyons Distillery, and Sailor's Home is another example. Burren Distillers is another example. He's advised Nick Ryan on Thomond Gate. So many. So we'll keep you up to date on Burren Distillers. We'll let you know what the story is with that one. It's time for me to move on to another whiskey. Or do we move on to a Poitin? What else we got here? Something craft. Something crafty. We did the Dingle. We'll do the Crater. Okay, good timing. Baoilleach Distillery up next. If Laurie's still on the chat here now, we're going to be relying on Laurie for a bit of information. I'm going to grab another glass here. If you're just joining, you're wondering, why am I in this darkness, and where's the good quality picture, and why am I wearing a hat, and where's my glasses? And there used to be a turtleneck at one time. I have replaced Barry. He's gone on to pursue a life in the gin industry. The camera broke. We had no time to get changed or ready for tonight's Shebeen. We were too busy trying to fix the camera, and so you'll have to take us as you get us tonight. Bad lighting, bad camera tonight, but hopefully the sound is good and you can hear things all right. Okay, so we're moving on to the Baoilleach Distillery, and in honor of the Baoilleach Distillery, I'm pouring a drop of Poitin from Baoilleach Distillery. It's called the Crater. The Crater, or is kind of an Irish language phrase for creature, which is historically what we kind of refer to alcohol as: a drop of the crater, a drop of creature. And this is Irish Poitin made at Baoilleach Distillery, Ireland's smallest distillery. You'll have heard the Crater mentioned in the song about whiskey that Hosier made famous not too long ago, which is a very old Irish song. Then stick to the Crater, the best thing in nature for sinking your sorrows and raising your joys. Baoilleach Distillery. This is a 60.4% ABV. And I want to show you the back of this bottle. We're going to put it up full on the screen here for a second. A series in praise of the small pot distillers who made the Crater. An exploration of flavors. Small pot, which is what Poitin means. Poitin, pot-een. Anything een in Ireland means small. Bohereen, small road. Boreen, Poitin, small pot. Mash, peated malt barley, double distilled, still strength. This is batch 1 in praise of the 130 Poitin makers in the Miva parish in 1819. There was 113 poitin makers, 130 poitin makers. Can you imagine? There wouldn't be a bit of work done. Not a bit of work done. Cian says, pure pressure wins. Crater here as well. Lovely nose, custard creams. Now, I was introduced to this through Laurie O'Dwyer from Whiskey Chats, through Daniel Pennington and Paul Costello, who are all buddies in the whiskey world here in Cork. And they couldn't stop talking about the Crater and said, there hasn't been a more flavorful poitin ever created in our lifetime in Ireland. And they have bought and filled their shelves with Crater, and I had to buy a bottle before it sold out to see what all the fuss was about. Crater, the same as the creature. It is, Tom. Crater just being kind of the Irish pronunciation, kind of Irish language or slang for the creature, the Crater. The Crater. We also call people Crater, like, oh, poor Crater, like the poor creature. All right, so let's bring up Baoilleach Distillery here. So what you're seeing there is not a small little elf's house in Lord of the Rings. It's Ireland's smallest distillery, Baoilleach Distillery. So I guarantee there's many of you listening to me pronounce Baoilleach going, there is no way on earth that's how you pronounce that. Irish language, it means boil, O'Boyle, and that's the family name, Michael O'Boyle. That's Michael O'Boyle there, the founder, the owner, the distiller, the bottle washer, the man who put the door on the building and cleaned the glass on the windows, Michael O'Boyle. He is the Boyle in Baoilleach Distillery. And it is a craft distillery. And by craft, I mean that if you look out the window, you can see the oats and you can see the barley that'll eventually find their way into the poitin. In fact, you can see the potatoes growing in the field. I say the field, in the bit of dirt in front of the distillery that will make it into some of their poitins and some of their spirits as well. Tiny, tiny operation. Historically has made gin, poitin, and what they're calling kind of a Donegal spirit or Donegal Mountain Dew, which is neither a spirit neither a whiskey nor a poitin. So a poitin, some people, there's a myth that I kind of grew up with, that I was convinced that poitin was made with potatoes. And that was something that we were told and we understood to be the truth, but it isn't the truth. And a very small percentage of poitins are made with potatoes. Most poitins would have been made with the grain available around at the time, not potatoes. Potatoes would have been for eating, and then you would use barley and oats, and maybe to a lesser extent wheat, historically, for making your poitin. It's made in a small little pot. It doesn't follow the same production methods necessarily as whiskey. It's not. Another myth is that poitin is just, if you were to leave poitin in a barrel, it would be whiskey eventually. Also not the case. Again, depends on how it's made. But whiskey production follows certain criteria in terms of what it is and how it's made. And poitin can differ from that as well. Poitin can't be aged in barrels. It can be rested in barrels for, is it up to 12 weeks? Somebody will correct me on that. But the Crater, anyway, is a poitin that is the most flavorful that has come out of the distillery. Look, clear. It's unrested in barrels, so it's just nice and clear. I mean, if you've ever nosed new make spirit, you know what that distilled barley note smells like. If you've ever nosed a smoked, peated new make spirit, you'll know exactly what this is like. You cannot argue that this is flavor. Whether it's to everyone's palate or not is another thing. You know, in Ireland years ago, they used to rub a bit of poitin on the soles of greyhounds' feet to make them run faster, because that hot, burning sensation will get them to chase the rabbit a lot faster. I might have to rub it on my feet now. 10 weeks, says Laurie. 10 weeks. Rested for up to 10 weeks. So it's a creamy, custardy, lightly smoked. For me, it feels kind of lightly smoked. But if the smallest sip fills your mouth, just absolutely fills your mouth. And look, poitin is really the forerunner to the modern whiskey industry that we know today. Poitin was what was being made in the hills of Donegal for centuries before Irish whiskey, as we would have come to know it, was made more legally. Back in those days, Poitin was whiskey, and Parliament was, they called Poitin whiskey, and they called regular whiskey Parliament. In other words, the Parliament got their cut on it. The Parliament got the tax on it. So it was Parliament and whiskey. Whiskey really meant Poitin. So they were making what they called whiskey in the hills and the valleys of kind of the Inishowen Peninsula and Donegal, and throughout Donegal for centuries. It would have been predominantly, almost entirely, smoked. In other words, it was the turf was used to heat the stills. Oftentimes the turf was used to dry the barley. So the smoky tradition, the peated tradition of both Poitin and whiskey that we know today is what was the hallmark of spirits that were produced in the north of Ireland, in the north coast, from the northwest all the way across the north over to the northeast for centuries. It is the quintessential style of Poitin and whiskey, was smoky whiskey for centuries. And so Baoilleach is bringing back this approach to Donegal distilling and Donegal Poitin making. As you see here, this is in honor of the Poitin makers from 1819. 130 of them in one parish making Poitin. And, it was a bit of back then, it would have been something that you could maybe trade. You could sell illicitly. You could trade it for a chicken, a horse, a cow, perhaps. You certainly drank it. Every house had a glass or an earthenware jug of Poitin hidden away somewhere. It was illegal. It was made illegal in Ireland in 1661. It was a legal right all the way up until 25 years ago in Ireland. And it's only in the last 5 years, I would argue 10 years, that we've started to see Poitin making coming back again. But it's been outlawed for 350 years in Ireland. Spiker says, not sure if you can get more craft in this place. No, I don't think so. I don't think you can. So tiny, and actually Laurie, you were up there working. Laurie went up there and did a bit of work experience. Like a transition year student, he was up there doing his distilling and brewing up there. So this is, it's creamy. It fills your mouth. The smallest sip, it's voluminous. It's flavor. So if we talk about craft, we talk about pursuing flavor. You won't find more flavor than the Creator, to be fair to it. Now, I'd have trouble drinking this regularly, but if you wanted to get the job done before you went out for the night and you gave yourself an old sip of the Creator, you'd be dancing all the way to the pub. All right, while we're sipping on this one, let's focus on another craft distillery, which I think is craft, larger in scale, but definitely doing things the craft way. And that is our friends at Redemin Estate Distillery, creators of our Shortcross whiskey. Here somewhere. Here it is. Our Stories and Sips Shortcross whiskey, peated single malt. They are, I would argue, following the craft producers playbook. David Boyd Armstrong and Fiona Boyd Armstrong, husband and wife team. Fiona's in charge of gin distilling and making, and David's in charge of whiskey distilling and whiskey making. And they have put this distillery together piece by piece, part by part. David's a missile engineer by training. He can figure out how things work pretty well, and has been using those skills to create unusual flavors. He's been applying his skills to distillation, to fermentation. Many of you will be familiar with Shortcross single malt that we released through our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club, because we talked at length about the length they went to create flavor through a slow approach to fermentation. So fermentation can happen for many distilleries, it's a 24-hour fermentation. In Ireland, with David, he's doing 70, 80, 90-hour fermentations, which is that brewing stage where you're allowing the yeast and the water and the sugars in the grain to interact. You're creating alcohol, but more so than just creating alcohol, you're creating flavor. And a long fermentation allows for more flavor creation. It allows for a secondary or a malolactic fermentation, where additional fruity esters and flavors are created that we wouldn't normally get if you rush through your fermentation. David's using his craft approach not just to fermentation, but to distillation, double distillation. He's got unique stills up there. He's got different setups of stills from rum and rum still, cognac, whiskey, gin, and he's using them interchangeably depending on what he's trying to make. And then he's playing around with wood, with different types of wood, with everything from chinkapin oak to regular ex-bourbon, ex-sherry cask. But he's doing things in a very craft way. Plus, if you reach out to Shortcross Whiskey, Redemin Estate Distillery, you're going to get in touch with Fiona, you're going to get in touch with David. They believe in the craft movement. They're inspired by the American craft distilling movement, the likes of Westward Spirits, the likes of Westward Whiskey, isn't it, up in the Pacific Northwest. They're very inspired by craft brewing throughout the United States. They've toured the United States, have gone to distillers and brewers conferences around the United States to really be inspired and learn from how things are being done in America. So they're taking those skills and they're applying them to Redemin Estate. So to me, they are a craft producer all day long, a little bit bigger scale, of course, than the likes of Boilock, but they're definitely a craft producer. Jason says, now we're on to Shortcross. Dang it. Okay. Well, Jason, you don't have to keep up liquid by liquid. I'm still on my crater from Baoilleach as well. We'll definitely do more with Poitin in months to come. And it's worth us understanding it and learning about it and seeing the intersection of Poitin and whiskey. And no different than back in 2012, when there were distilleries like Dingle releasing gins and vodkas to fund their whiskey production, there are now distilleries releasing Poitins, gins, absinthes, etc., to fund their whiskey production. So distilling and craft distilling is evolving and changing, and Ireland is moving maybe into a more open, aware, accepting environment to try things like Poitin. There are other spirits or other whiskies coming out of Redemin Estate that'll bear the Shortcross name in the coming months that I think you'll be really interested in. David has done a lot of work on 100% rye whiskies as well, or rye whiskies that are not quite 100% that he's working on as well. I have a small sample of the rye here, which I've tried, which is very good. Their rye and malt, which they released at both cask strength and regular strength, I thought were fantastic early releases from a new distillery. So they know what they're doing. And again, they're craft all day long. Next up, and we're flying through these here, but we want to cover a lot. Boann Distillery. We mentioned Boann Distillery last week. It is a family-owned distillery owned by the Cooney family, and Pat Cooney and his family. Pat, very involved in the drinks industry for the last 30, 40 years, in distribution, in manufacturing and production, and now in the production of whiskey. Boann Distillery we're mentioning as a craft producer for a couple of reasons. One, they are approaching things in a unique way. They have released their Whistler series of whiskies that were sourced whiskies that I know many of you found, and I happen to be a fan of a lot of the Whistler whiskies. I think they've managed to put a great stamp of their own on a sourced whiskey. They've done a tremendous job on the packaging. I think they've got beautiful packaging, and they at the same time have been busy laying down pot still whiskey. So they are making predominantly pot still whiskey in Boann Distillery. They paused the production of their regular pot still whiskey about 2 years ago to lay down about 100 barrels of mash bills pot still whiskey that no longer fits the modern definition of pot still whiskey. In other words, whiskeys that were inspired by old mash bills, in other words, old recipes that would no longer be acceptable today as a pot still whiskey. They might be by the time they mature, because Irish definitions of pot still whiskey are going to evolve over the coming year, I believe. And today, pot still whiskey is very defined. It is a mash of minimum 30% malted barley, minimum 30% unmalted barley, and up to 5% other grains. Historically, there was much more than 5% other grains. There was 20%, 30% oats, wheat, etc. in there. And those are things that wouldn't be allowed today. But what Boann Distillery did 2 years ago was they embarked on a vintage mash bill program. They did this to facilitate historian Fionnán O'Connor's thesis and his work, his studies. He wanted to produce these old mash bills, bring them to life. And so for a number of months, they distilled these old mash bills. Fionnán and Michael Walsh, the distiller at the time, would brew and distill, and they've laid all of these down into a variety of casks. That is the most craft approach possible, I think, is bringing back how it was done historically, utilizing advanced technology today. They have stills that are coated in kind of a nanotechnology, which basically they've lined the inside of their stills with a copper lining that is dimpled. So whereas most stills will be flat on the inside, which gives a certain surface area to the liquid, the Boann stills, I think it's invisible to the naked eye, but they have a lining on the inside, of the copper lining on the inside, that is dimpled, which allows for more copper to have more contact with the spirit. And the more, that's what you want your spirit to have copper contact. It is what removes poisonous compounds that we don't want, and is the heat conductor, etc. So they've got a modern approach to distilling, but they were using historic mash bills, not too dissimilar to what Blackwater Distillery are doing, to what Killowen are doing. So I think that gives them the ability to call themselves, or for us to call them, a craft distillery. They are a bigger scale, perhaps maybe the largest of the distilleries we've currently focused on tonight. So for those of you who are, I see mention of moonshine in the comments here. So for those of you who are familiar with moonshine, so this unaged white spirit in America, help us understand, or help the other commenters understand, what is moonshine? In other words, what are the ingredients? Is it corn predominantly? How is moonshine made in the United States? If anybody wants to type that in or share that information, that'd be helpful, because yeah, it's easy to make a comparison and say, oh, poitín, Irish moonshine, you mean? And you're right, it's not the same, but it'd be helpful for folks who do know about moonshine to put in the details of what moonshine is there in the comments as well. Cian says the Whistler 7-year-old cask strength, still one of his favorite whiskies. Jason loves their Imperial Stout and Double Oak from Boann. David has almost cracked his bottle of the Whistler Imperial Stout cask. David, I don't know, are you looking for an invitation or a reason to open it? We'll give you both. We would like to do a trip to Baoilleach Distillery yet this year in Ireland, maybe a Dublin to Dublin trip. So Anthony Sheehy and I have been talking about a domestic whiskey bus trip that might take in Baoilleach Distillery, Slieve League Distillers, so the home of the Silky, Ardara Distillery, and also take in, where else? Crawley Distillery, for example, in Donegal. So we could maybe stay in Donegal town, go up on a Friday night, stay 2 nights in Donegal and visit the 3 distilleries, or maybe another one, and then come back to Dublin again. So we'll keep, once we have any dates or anything on that figured out, or we get that going, we'll let you know in case you're in Ireland or you want to come over for it. Just be like a 2 or 3 day little mini whiskey bus trip to Donegal as well. All right, let us move on to, no, we need another slide deck. We reached the end of that slide deck. Right, where is it? Here we go. Here's the, these are the Whistler whiskies that some of you will be familiar with already. If you just joined us, welcome to the Shebeen. We are chatting about craft Irish distilling and the rise of it. Let us move on from whiskey a little bit, because some great feedback and suggestions that came in. This one came in from Laurie earlier today. that we should focus as well, not just on craft distilling when it comes to whiskey, but others that were distilling before craft distilling was a thing in Ireland. I give you as Exhibit A, Longville House, which is just outside Mallow in County Cork. And they have been making and distilling apple brandy in Longville House, which is a hotel in Cork, outside Mallow. They've been distilling there since the 1980s and have had a very successful distillery that they've supplied their brandy to many restaurants and high-end stores in Ireland, and they serve it in Longville House. So apple brandy being made with apples, two different varieties of apples that they grow in their own orchards, and they then ferment and distill right there on site. So they are worth mentioning as an example of distilling that is craft distilling that goes beyond the realm of just whiskey alone, because this craft distilling movement for Irish whiskey is certainly a more recent development, whereas gin and apple brandies and the similar, they've got a bit of a longer history in Ireland. Unaged corn whiskey, says Gahan, is what moonshine is. Unaged corn whiskey. I've never tried moonshine. Kristen says moonshine is generally corn and barley, but wheat and rye can also be part of the mash bill, and you have to make it in the woods, apparently. So first you have to grow a forest, and then you have to find corn and barley. Bo says, same as 90% poitín, except made with corn. Or whatever was available. Now, Loughrea Distillery, we mentioned last week. Loughrea Distillery on the banks of the River Shannon. It's in Longford. You don't hear many mentions of Longford when it comes to whiskey, but Loughrea are trying to change that. They're in the heartland of Ireland. Ireland's hidden heartland is how Tourism Ireland wants you to know, or wants you to think about it. And Loughrea Distillery, one of the newest distilleries in Ireland, actually, as a whiskey distillery. They just moved to a new location in the town of Lanesborough in Longford. You can get there by boat. You can sail up the River Shannon and get there. They have sourced whiskies called the Bridge series of whiskies, which have been very well received, as well as Bart's whiskey, which we sampled last week as well when we talked about family-run whiskey companies. The Clancy family, 2 brothers, 1 sister, are the family behind it. And I bring up Loughrea Distillery tonight as a craft producer, not because of their whiskey, but because of their gin. So Slingshot Gin is the world's first gin that uses peat as a botanical. So when you're making gin, there's a few ways to make gin. You can hang a basket of botanicals inside the still, and lemons and orange and juniper and coriander and whatever you want in it. You can macerate your botanicals inside the still, or you can distill with the botanicals as well. Slingshot distills with the botanicals, and they use peat as a botanical, and no other spirit that I'm aware of uses peat as a botanical. Now, peat is very important to that part of Ireland. It is the home of the bog. The Midlands in Ireland is where there are many bogs, that those fields, those areas of 10,000 years of decaying vegetation and flora and fauna that with the right moisture content have preserved. They've preserved everything that's fallen in there. But, thousands of years ago, we discovered that if you dug the earth, dug the turf, we call it turf, out of the ground in a bog and dried it out, you were left with a fibrous material that burned very easily. And while it generated a lot of white smoke, signifying that a pope had been found, you could also heat your house, you could dry your clothes, you could heat yourself, you could cook on it, and you could burn it, you could use it to power machinery, and it became a big part of Ireland's peat industry in the Midlands, where manufacturing factories were built to not just machinery to harvest the peat, but also to process it and to use it as a fuel for industry, to heat our homes. It was compressed into very tightly compressed briquettes that we burned in our homes. And in fact, the Clancy family, their father and their mother, met because of peat. They were both teachers in Lanesborough in a school that was built for children of workers who worked in the peat industry, who worked for Board Namona, which was the industry, the government department in Ireland that oversaw the peat industry. And their parents were teachers who met teaching in the same school. And there are neighborhoods and parts of that town, Lanesborough, and other parts of Longford and other parts of the Midlands that are purpose built for the workers of those factories, those plants, peat plants at the time, which is quite interesting. Some great advice coming in there now on moonshine as well. I used to work with a lot of Scandinavians years ago, and aquavit was their tipple of choice. And I mean, they swore by it. They swore by aquavits, the Norwegians and the Swedish, and they'd have it in the middle of the day with lunch. They'd have it with their herrings. They'd have it with dinner at night. They'd have it if they were cold. They'd have it if they were hot. And there's no harm in an indigenous, unaged spirit. Next up, we're going to focus on another distillery, craft distillery in Ireland, and it's Cork's first distillery, city centre distillery in 50 years, Rebel City Distillery, in the heart of Cork. The building you see on the left is the former Ford factory in Cork. Ford, the first ever factory in the world outside of Dearborn, Michigan, that made Ford cars and trucks and tractors, was in Cork. Henry Ford's grandfather was from Cork, from Ballinascarty in West Cork, and his first overseas plant was in Cork City, right on the quays, on the docks in the city centre of Cork. The factory closed in the 1980s. It was abandoned for many, many years. Today, it's home to Rebel City Distillery. It's home to Franciscan Well Brewing. It's home to Cork Coffee Roasters. It's right beside the Marina Market, a big indoor market in Cork. Rebel City Distillery are in a part of that today. Husband and wife team. They're making gin and they're making absinthe, something that we don't hear a lot about, and definitely doing it from a craft perspective. And friend of the Shebeen, Roisin Barry, who played her guitar here for us a few weeks ago when Paul Costa was on. Roisin just took up the job as distillery visitor center manager, employee number 1 at Rebel City Distillery. So congratulations to Roisin. So we'll be visiting Rebel City Distillery soon for an old tour. But they are making absinthe and they're making Maharani gin. So husband and wife team, Irish and Indian, husband from Ireland, wife from India, and they are using their respective backgrounds and cultures to inspire and inform kind of a global approach to making spirits using local ingredients in Cork, as well as kind of ingredients that you can't get in Cork that you can get elsewhere and bring them in. Some of these botanicals for their gin, you wouldn't be finding those in Cork, I can tell you. But they are another example of a business that has identified that there is now a market for a broadened palette of consumers in Ireland and overseas that would be willing to sample and try and hopefully enjoy small batch made spirits, where historically the production of gin would have been the preserve of the large manufacturers. Today, craft distilling, a unique approach using unique botanicals, is something that us as consumers are interested in trying. And so we tip our hat to Rebel City Distillery, right in the heart of Cork. And we're hoping to do some Irish whiskey / Irish spirit experiences with Rebel City Distillery over the next year as well. So hopefully creating something unique that if you come to Cork, you could do an experience there through Irish whiskey experiences. A new distillery in the real capital. It's the only distillery in Cork City. There's no other distillery in Cork City. Outside the city, you've got Black's Distillery in Kinsale, Clonakilty Distillery in Clonakilty, Middleton Distillery, of course, in Middleton, and you have got West Cork Distillery in Skibbereen. But and they're all whiskey producers as well as gin and vodkas. Excuse me. Whereas Rebel City Distillery, they're not, I don't think they have any plans for whiskey making, just gin and absinthe currently, but other spirits coming. Declan's a fan. All right, so those are a sample, a smattering, a cross section of the smorgasbord that is the craft distilling movement in Ireland. 10 years ago, we couldn't have had a discussion about craft distilling in Ireland because we'd have talked about Dingle and maybe Longville House, and then we'd have gone to bed. And it wouldn't have been much of a discussion at all. Today, we could go on and on and on and on. And I hope it excites you as much as it excites me about what's happening, what's going to happen, the spirits we're going to get to taste as they age, mature, and come to market, the unaged spirits that are going to bring flavors to us in ways we mightn't have enjoyed before or thought about before or even considered before. One of the best-selling cocktails, for example, in Bar 1661 in Dublin is called the Belfast Coffee, which is a chilled Irish coffee made with poitin. And those are things we might not have thought of 10 years ago, to have a cold Irish coffee made with poitin. And today, not only is it becoming more mainstream and more normalized, it's being elevated. It's gone beyond just something that we can all enjoy to something that is sought after, something that is luxurious. So I think that's a great sign of the movement and the expansion and the progression within the world of craft distilling and the world of spirits in Ireland generally. Whiskey, of course, being the thing that I'm most interested in, that many of you are most interested in as well. But there's more to the world of Irish spirits than just whiskey. There's Irish creams, there are poitins, there are gins, vodkas, absinthes, and on, of course, our whiskey as well. Jason says, do you ever worry about oversaturation in the market? Jason, I think we're a long way from oversaturation, if you ask me. I think that if you look at where the Irish whiskey market even is, so take Irish whiskey as an example, in the 1860s, 1870s, Irish whiskey was by percentage the largest percentage of whiskey sold globally. We were the number one player, the number one by production, by sales globally. That was overtaken by the Scots, it was overtaken by everyone. The Scots, the Americans, the Canadians, the Japanese, everybody overtook Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey today I think is about 5% of whiskey sales globally. So there's a massive market for whiskey, for Irish whiskey. There's a massive market for whiskey that is currently being met in many cases by other countries, by other producers outside of Ireland. And for the longest time, Ireland didn't have supply. We didn't have things beyond Jameson, Bushmills Original, Tullamore Dew, Paddy, Powers Gold. Those were the whiskies that were on shelves in the United States up until 5 to 10 years ago. I think you'll all agree. If you even saw more than one of those on the shelf, you were surprised. What that meant was that for many, many years, Irish whiskey was just Jameson, and still to many to this day, Jameson is Irish whiskey is Jameson. There is nothing else. That tells me there's such an untapped market for those that would be open to other things if they only knew they existed, or if they existed in the first place. And they didn't for the longest time. And now that they do, and the distribution channels are in place, we're already seeing it. We're already seeing the demand. We're seeing container loads of peated Irish whiskies going from Donegal, from Sleeve League distillers, container loads of the Silkies heading out to almost all 50 states in the United States. Louise McGuane, founder of JJ Corrie, to me sums it up the best, that this is not an oversaturation or an oversupply. It's a market correction. In other words, we're only now starting to supply to a market in a way that they always wanted. There just wasn't the supply available. Every distillery, every brand that goes to market, they won't all be successful. They won't all make it in the long run, but each of them has a small little chisel. And what they do with that chisel is they chip away at the competitors. They chip away at barriers to entry. They chip away at perceptions that Jameson is the only game in town. And they slowly introduce people through education, entertainment, enjoyment to whiskies beyond those that come in a green bottle with the name of John Jameson on the label. And I think we're a long way away from meeting the demand. In fact, the bigger worry that exists currently in the world of Irish whiskey is not oversaturation. The bigger worry is that there's a lack of maturation space and bottling capacity in Ireland. Those are bigger problems that I think are getting more people, keeping more brand owners awake at night than will there be enough people to buy our whiskey. In the words of the iconic Lauren McMullen, we're getting back on top where we belong. Now we've a bit to go, but I'd agree. Like, I think the quality is there if we can meet the demand. Midleton Distillery, with their proposed and already embarked upon plans for doubling capacity. So they're at what I think 120 million liters per annum of production, like 120 million. They're now doubling capacity. In the next week, you're going to hear about another large distillery in Ireland doubling capacity in the next very soon. And those are distilleries and brands that spend a lot of money listening to the market, understanding different markets globally, and investing based on what they're learning. So when Midleton Distillery says we're investing 200 million in doubling capacity, it gives great comfort to others along the way who are wondering about what the futures of Irish whiskey. Well, Midleton will tell us, because they're not going to risk 200 million on a sinking market. So they have some medium term vision, perhaps, telling them where the market's going. So again, capacity for warehousing. There are warehousing projects being turned down by city and county governments around Ireland regularly because they're being opposed by residents who don't want to live amongst them, who don't want to be surrounded by them. There isn't enough bottling capacity because it's a very expensive process to create bottling. There isn't enough bottling. If you were to project where Irish whiskey is aiming to go by 2030, today Ireland doesn't have the warehousing space or the bottling capacity for the amount of whiskey that'll be distilled, which means we'll have trouble. So that's something that's being focused on as well. Okay, so there's a couple of questions that came in during the week that I wanted to answer when I asked what should we talk about this week. And one of these questions, we can answer these. There's two questions we can answer pretty quickly. Why is there no such thing as distiller strength whiskey? So we have talked about in our whiskey club that where possible, we will release whiskey at what we call distiller strength. But that's not a strength that you see very often. There's three strengths of whiskey that are worth talking about. The first is the still strength. So when a whiskey comes off the still, it's not a whiskey yet, it's a spirit. It becomes a whiskey after 3 years in wooden barrels on the island of Ireland. When it comes off the still, it has a ABV, an alcohol by volume strength, depending on the distillery, typically around 84 to 86% alcohol by volume, or about 172 to 180 proof. That is a strength that is too high typically to go into wooden barrels, because that alcohol strength will burn the barrel. It will damage the wood inside the barrel. So typically that strength is then cut down to about 65% alcohol by volume, about 130 proof. It goes into the barrel and it ages. Let's say it's then extracted from the barrel after 4 years for bottling. That's called cask strength if no more water is added. So if it comes out of the barrel at 56.8% ABV and goes into a bottle like that, that's cask strength. So you've got your still strength that comes off the still, you got your cask strength, it comes out of the barrel, and then you've also got your the legal minimum amount that can be bottled at, which is 40% ABV. So 40% ABV is the lowest. Cask strength is typically that big leap up, and then still strength, we don't see that on bottles. That's just something in the distillery. The other number is distiller strength, which is the one I'm most interested in. I think other people are too, which is, and I've heard this from other people, cask strength whiskey doesn't tell us what the best ABV is. And some people want the distiller to tell us if it tastes best at 66 or 48 or 42, then give it to us at that. Whether it's high or low is less important than whether it's at the strength the distiller or the blender believes it tastes the best. That's the ideal world. Now, fighting that ideal world, the little devil on the opposite shoulder of the angel is saying, well, hold on a second. If I release it at a high ABV, I have to pay high duty to the Irish government. It's going to drive the price of my whiskey up and it's not going to be competitive. And then the angel might say, but more people will like it. And the devil will say, but we'll be uncompetitive and we can't do that. And so you've got this constant dance / fist fight between the finance department, the marketers, and the makers. And they have to find this middle ground somewhere. Ultimately, normally the marketers are the ones that are going to win, because the marketers know the market and understand what is being sought, and they get to order what they need from the distillers. And then they'll all have to fight together with the finance department at the end of it. So that is why there's no such thing as distiller strength, because historically the trend has been either cask strength or somewhere in the low 40s, 40, 43, 46. They're completely arbitrary numbers. They don't mean those are the best strengths. They're just about consistency. No distiller in the world is going to be able to convince me that their whiskey, that they did all the tests and they did all the tastes, and they can confirm that their whiskey tastes the best at 40% ABV. Nobody. Because it's too arbitrary. It's too ridiculous. The only reason whiskey is released at 40% is to pay the lowest duty on it and to have the cheapest possible price to market. That's it. There's no other reason for whiskey to be at 40% now that that's the law. Now, why that's the law is another thing that you can go to storiesysips.com and find out why the law is that it is 40%. But there's no reason why it should be today based on flavor. Just like there's no reason why it should be at cask strength, because that's not a sign of it being at its optimal tasting strength. However, there's a large cohort of whiskey fans who have been both taught to think this way, but who also think this way naturally, which is that just give it to me at cask strength so that I get to decide what is the best ABV for me, not what the distiller decides is the best ABV for her or for him. Two different schools of thought. Have at it the way you want it. Next question. How does temperature and climate affect whiskey maturation? This came in during the week. We could do a whole show on this one alone. So in Ireland, we have a very temperate climate, which means we don't have wild swings in temperature all year throughout the year. It's just always cold. Tuesday in June, if we're lucky, on one Tuesday in June, we'll get a nice summer. That's it. So we have a temperate climate. It happens to be ideal for whiskey maturation because it's predictable and it is low temperatures, but not too low and certainly not too high, which means we don't lose a lot of our whiskey during maturation to evaporation, the angel's share. So the temperature and the climate affect whiskey maturation in a number of ways. Whiskey maturation is very simply the process where the spirit that is put into a wooden container interacts with that wooden container in a number of ways over its maturation period. There are going to be additive reactions, subtractive reactions, compound reactions that happen between the spirit and the wood and the spirit, and both of them together interacting. There are the spirit and the wood obviously is an organic compound. It's porous. While it's a good container, it is subject to expansion and contraction with temperature, like many organic compounds are. Whiskey barrels are, over the course of a maturation period, expanding and contracting every minute, every second of the day based on the pressure, based on the barometric pressure that exists. And as the temperatures and the pressure changes, so too does the expansion, the contraction of the barrel and the evaporation that's happening as a result of it. As temperatures go up, more evaporation happens. As temperatures go down, less evaporation happens. Now, this is just very broadly. We could go into a lot of scientific detail about the variabilities within all of these things, but just very broad brushstrokes on this. The higher the temperatures, the more water that is going to evaporate. Water and alcohol boil, and they boil at different temperatures, don't they? Water 100 degrees, alcohol at 79. So at higher temperatures, more water evaporates. At lower temperatures, slightly lower, more of the alcohol evaporates. In Ireland, distillers talk about how with the angels share this evaporation. In Ireland, the angels are happier because they get more alcohol, whereas in hotter climates like Taiwan or Israel, more of the water evaporates. There can be the occasions when in warm climates, as the high temperatures cause the liquid to evaporate, because more water is evaporating, the alcohol by volume can actually increase. So you might put a whiskey in at 65% ABV and you might take it out and you find it's 75% ABV because more of the water evaporated than the alcohol. In Ireland, it tends to be the inverse of that. It tends to be when you put a spirit in there at 65%, the alcohol evaporates, not the water, because of our lower temperatures, meaning we will take it out of the barrel at 58, 59%, etc. We lose about 2% a year of our barrels to evaporation. So pressure changes. As the pressure changes, the barrel is expanding and contracting naked to the visible eye, or invisible to the naked eye even. And as temperatures go up and down, often in correlation with pressure, evaporation is happening. And that's what affects whiskey maturation. There's no such thing as speeding up or slowing down maturation. You can't speed up or slow down time. But what you can do is you can advance the effects of interaction with the wood through climates, where in the warehouse something is stored, whether something is in a climate controlled warehouse or not. In Ireland, 99% of warehouses are not climate controlled at all. And they're just they're open to the elements virtually. Some warehouses in Ireland have their doors open all day long, and they are the same warehouses where the offices are located. People are walking in and out, and there's a lot of Irish weather going through those warehouses. So that's very broadly how temperature and climate affect whiskey maturation. In Kentucky, Tennessee, Israel, Taiwan, you can lose 10, 20, 25% of your barrel volume every year. And that's a lot. Ireland, just 2%. So we're kind of happy with that. All right. Sinead, that's the questions answered. If you have any more questions, throw them in there. Chris says, building on the temperature and climate question, what about altitude? Yes. Time to ask our friends at Talnua. Well, that comes down to pressure, doesn't it? The higher you go, more pressure, altitude, and that's going to affect how your barrel expands and contracts as well. That's going to affect it. So yeah, Colorado, much higher altitude. That's going to affect in Colorado the maturation of whiskies like this, which will be tasted at our Stories and Sips whiskey tasting with the Cork Whisky Society on Monday week. If you're in Cork and you want to attend, let me know and we'll see what we can do. Folks asking what's happening in Bushmills next week. I will be I'm going to Bushmills on Tuesday, day after tomorrow, and I'll be up there for quite a few days and looking forward to going back to the Antrim coast. Lauren, we might see you up there, and there's going to be some announcements coming from Bushmills this week. So those of you in our community are going to get exclusive access to some information and to some videos and some pictures, and you're gonna be the first to hear about what's happening in Bushmills. So keep an eye on our Irish Whiskey Fans in America group this week and on the Stories and Sips social media channels. And if you get our email each week, you'll get details on that. So some exciting things in the evolution of the Irish whiskey industry coming out of Bushmills this week, which is going to be which is exciting. So yeah, so that's what's going on in the world of Irish whiskey and the world of craft distilling. Are we more informed or less informed about craft distilling now, or do we care? Are we interested? What matters? I'm curious. I'm curious to know what are the things that interest you when it comes to Irish whiskey. If things like discussions like this are of interest, we keep doing more of them. And if you've no more questions, I think we're getting close to the end here now. Great topics, says Jason. Great information, says Jason. Very good. We better get our camera fixed before we go to Bushmills. Mark says, excellent information. Now we just need access to all these gems. Yeah, I agree with that. Richard says, very entertaining, educational. Kristen, very informative. Thanks for all the work you do. Thanks, Kristen. Great night, says Chris. Judy says, great topic. All right. Good stuff. Rob, hey, Rob, out in Japan. How you getting on? Very interesting to stuff as always. Keep it up. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Bo Jameson, to Connemara, to Waterford. This club is a great journey. Hoping to keep going forward. We'll help you out. We'll do our best to keep you nourished and satiated whiskey-wise. Jason says, as long as the drone works. We might have to put a drone up, all right. I have to charge the drone tomorrow. Tony Nicoletti says, this has been great. Thanks, Tony. And Bo learned a bunch. We will have, next Sunday, we will have another Shebeen. And I hope to share with you some exclusive videos from Bushmills on Sunday about things that many of you will be surprised to hear, and it'll come as a great surprise to many of you what we'll share. And I'm really, really excited to share it. There's some things that we've been sitting on for quite a while, knowledge-wise, and we've agreed not to share. But next week we'll get to share them. So tune in next Sunday because you're going to see some exclusive footage and videos of things from the North Antrim coast, which I'm excited about. And you'll get some pictures before that as well, probably on Thursday and Friday. What's up? Oh yes, I did a search earlier to find out how many days it is until our whiskey bus, and the answer is 125 days until our whiskey bus. Our next whiskey bus takes place August 19th to August 26th. We are at the moment working through room assignments for our wonderful whiskey bus guests with our hotels. Some of you who are single travelers who are looking to be paired up will be getting emails over the next week or so about potential matchups for people to share rooms with. And we're finalizing some more details on the whiskey bus. 125 days to our whiskey bus tour around Ireland, 7 days, August 19th to the 26th. We are looking at March 16th approximately for our next whiskey bus, March 16th to the 23rd, which would include a kickoff on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland and drop you all off at the Cork Whiskey Festival to continue your journey beyond the week if you wanted to, with classes and tastings at Cork Whiskey Fest. So those are tentative details that you're hearing here first, tentatively. And I say tentative because I haven't even told my wonderful business partner, Anthony Sheehy, about these tentative details. Such is the trust that he won't mind. But approximately March 16th to March 23rd. And it's a whiskey bus that's going to head west. And it's going to start in Dublin, head west across the country, and work our way down the west coast and then back to the south coast, and then up to Dublin again. So kind of a Ring of Ireland in 7 whirlwind days. But we've already started the ideation, not the planning, but the ideation. Free dialysis in Cork, says Mark. Great hospitals in Cork that we can connect you with. Just get your health insurance. Chris says he's going to choke me again. Yeah, it wouldn't be the first time or the last time. We can't take any bookings yet, Tony. We can't be trusted this early on. let us get a date in place first, and then we're going to do our usual. Well, I say our usual. We're going to do a first come first serve thing. But we'll give you plenty of notice. I would say it'll be a couple of months before we can. Well, maybe be nice to do it before a couple of months to get the itinerary together. Leave it with us. You'll be the first to hear. Oh yes, Jason's still waiting on the cruise. Yeah, we have to get that organized. The world's first Irish whiskey cruise. We're on it. We're on it. You know, I had almost forgotten about it. Such are the ideas every day of all the things I'm thinking about. That's the biggest one of all. I should have thought about that. All right, folks, that's it. Thanks everyone for joining and for keeping up to date on Irish whiskey. The distilleries, the brands are very appreciative of the support that you provide in the United States. And for those of you who stayed up late in Ireland and the UK, thank you for that and for keeping me company this late. We'll be back next week. I'll keep you posted during the week with more details of from Bushmills and details of our next club whiskey bottling coming hopefully in the next couple of weeks as well. And we'll keep things going. We'll keep chatting, keep hanging out, and keep talking about Irish whiskey together. So thanks for all the support, and a very good night to all of you. And a toast to you with a drop of poitín. So, sláinte, and we'll see you all soon. Cheers, folks.